Hi, boys and girls. This is Mr. Tom. Boy, I am so excited to read to you another Bible story. This Bible story is so exciting. I can hardly wait to read it to you. If you remember last week, Paul the Apostle had been arrested, and he went before a trial before King Agrippa and the governor Festus. And Paul appealed to Caesar. He said he wanted Caesar to hear his case and to judge his trial. And so they got on a boat, and the boat would have looked something like this. See this boat? Wooden boat. This is the kind of boat that they had back in Paul's day. And you see the sails. There's the foresail right there in front of the ship. But it was a wooden ship, and they set out to go to Rome. But it was the time of the year where there were storms at sea, and Paul told them not to go because it was not safe. And so they took off sailing, and they left from Caesarea to Sidon. They came over here, and they made it to the island of Crete. And it was there that Paul told them, don't go any further because it's not safe. But they did anyway. And when they did, there was a powerful storm that came up, and it blew them out to sea. And it was a terrible storm. It was called a nor'easter. And so let's read this story and see what happens. The boat sailed along, staying close to shore, but the weather suddenly changed, and a powerful wind blew the ship out to sea. The sailors couldn't control where the ship went. Powerful winds battered the ship, and the crew threw the cargo overboard to try to make the ship lighter so it would not sink. The storm kept raging, so they even threw the equipment they needed to guide the boat. It was so scary. Look, here's a picture of what it might have looked like. With lightning, you see the lightning? And here's the ship, and the waves are crashing against the ship, and it's the wind's blowing, the waves are big. It would be so scary. And this went on for 2 weeks, for 14 days. They didn't see the sun or the stars or the moon. It was totally dark, and they were in this storm. And it was so scary. The storm went on for several days, and those on the ship were certain they were going to die. The men were too frightened and working too hard to even eat. Paul called the crew together and said, "Men, you should have listened to me. I told you this wasn't a safe time to travel. Anyway, don't worry. No one will die on this journey. An angel of God came to me last night and told me that we will arrive in Rome, and I will have a chance to stand trial before Caesar. So don't be afraid. We are all going to be fine." Around midnight on the 14th night of the storm, the sailors saw land nearby. They were afraid the ship would crash into the rocks near the land. They threw 4 anchors out, but the ship continued to be blown toward the land. The anchors were like brakes to try to stop the ship from going into the island. Finally, they tried to get off the ship, but Paul warned them that they would die if they got off in the powerful storm. So they stayed on board. "Please eat something," Paul begged as morning came. They hadn't eaten anything for 2 weeks. "Eat and don't worry. I promise you that everyone will be safe." Paul took some bread, thanked God for it, and passed it out to everyone on board. You know, it's always appropriate to thank God for our food wherever we are. And Paul did that on a ship in the middle of a storm to thank God for his food. The sailors tried to guide the ship between some rocks near the shore, but it crashed into the rocks and broke up. Some of the sailors wanted to kill the prisoners instead of letting them escape, but the officer in command wouldn't allow that. He liked Paul. His name was Julius. He was protecting Paul. Everyone safely escaped the sinking ship and made it to shore. Here is another picture. When the ship ran aground and all the men were in the water and they all made it to shore safely. And here is a picture of Paul, the apostle, looking at everything and I'm sure praying for people to be safe as they came ashore. And everyone was safe. And there was 276 people on this ship, and every one of them was safe, even though the ship had crashed on the rocks. They were on the island of Malta. Let me show you where Malta is. So they had made it all the way over to right here. There's a little island there. That's where they ran aground. That's where they crashed. And so they came to on that island, the island of Malta. The people of the island were very kind and built a fire for the men to warm themselves. Paul helped by gathering sticks and putting them on the fire. But as he was picking up sticks, a poisonous snake bit him on the hand. The people saw it hanging on him and thought that he would be killed, that he would die from the poisonous snake. He must be a murderer, and justice is prevailing since he didn't die at sea, and the snake is now going to kill him. They said this to one another, but Paul just shook the snake off of his hand and wasn't hurt at all. The people changed their mind when they realized that he was not going to die. God protected Paul when the poisonous snake bit his hand. It so happened that the father of the chief official of the island was very sick. Paul went in and prayed for the man, and he was healed. Then all the other sick people on the island came and were cured by Paul's prayers to God. God cured all the sick people that Paul prayed for on the island. Wow. 3 months after the shipwreck, they sailed on to Rome. They got on another boat. Even though he was a prisoner, Paul was allowed a private house to live in with a soldier to guard him. With the guard standing beside him, he was allowed to preach there to the people who would come to see him. For the next 2 years, Paul lived there and preached about God's kingdom, and no one tried to stop him. But since Paul could not travel anymore, he thought of all the churches that he loved and he helped to establish in all the Christians. And so he started writing letters to them. He started writing letters to the Galatians. Let me show you where they lived. That was a church that he established. So the Galatians lived up in this area, and he wrote a letter to the Ephesians, which was around here, and to the Corinthians that lived right up in here, and to the Thessalonians up in here, and to the Colossians over here. And he wrote letters to Timothy, his young friend, and to Titus and to Philemon. He was writing letters to everyone that he could think of that he missed so much in the churches. And those letters are in our Bible. They're in our New Testament. And Paul was telling the Christians there how to live to be like Jesus. And the church just kept growing and growing and growing. You know what? The Apostle Paul had a great idea. Even though he could not see his friends, he wrote letters to them. And I think we should do the same thing. You know, we could write a letter to our friends that we haven't been able to see in this pandemic, this bad, yucky coronavirus, and we hadn't been able to be with our friends and see them. We could write letters to them, or we might get a card and send them a card and just let them know that we're thinking about them and missing them. I have a card right here that I think I'm going to send to my friends. So it says, every time I think of you, and there's a kitty cat on there, it says, I get a case of the happies. And so I think our friends would be so excited to get a card from us. So why don't we do that? I'm going to do that this week. I'm going to send a card to a couple of my special friends. So why don't you do that as well? Thank you for letting me read another Bible story to you this week. Remember that God loves you so much. And I will see you next week.